Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt, and today we are going to be doing our annual look at the short films that are shortlisted for the Academy Awards. Now, because I am a crazy person who is obsessed with watching all of the movies in the Oscar race, I have seen 43 out of 45 of these short films. That's right, I do track down all of these so that I know as much as possible about them before nominations come out. It's very easy to skip over the short film categories, to just go with what Gold Derby says, to just pick the awards expert top 5, see what everyone else is feeling. But truthfully, I don't like blind predicting this category. I like to know a little bit more about these films, and not just that, these 45 short films are made by mostly up-and-coming filmmakers. For many of these filmmakers, being on the shortlist is the largest recognition that they've had through their career so far. This is a really big moment for all of these filmmakers, and I think it's worth watching the films, especially because for 30 of these 45, it stops here. This is the end of the road. But these films do deserve recognition. They deserve to be talked about. So today, I'm going to be predicting the lineups for all of the Oscar short film categories, but not just that, I'm going to tell you about the films too. And if any of these sound like they interest you, I encourage you, go and check them out. Like I said, these are the filmmakers of tomorrow. Now, before we get in, let's just talk about my stats with predicting here, because I don't want you to just blindly go with what I say. So I have been watching all of the shortlisted short films since 2020. In that time period, I have a spot on 60% hit rate on nominations. It's not as amazing as I would like it to be, but I pretty consistently get 3 out of 5 in every category. So if you go with my predictions, I feel quite confident in telling you, you will get 60% on these. Because the shorts categories don't have precursors, because most people don't know anything about the films, and we don't know how the industry is responding to each of them, it can be very easy to just input random things on your awards expert and end up with a fat 0% in every category. Honestly, I view these 3 categories as being the make or break on your overall Oscar nominations. Getting a perfect category will put you far and above the rest. Getting 3, 4 out of 5, that is helping you quite a bit. But if you are just randomly picking and you get a really bad lineup here, then that is going to tank your overall average. So my recommendation to you, don't just blindly go with my rankings, but listen to what I say about each film and see if it strikes you. If that sounds like an Oscar nomination to you, just maybe that's one that'll go in your lineup. And after nominations, let me know in the comments, what did I help you with? What films did I steer you in the wrong direction with? I would love to hear it. But for now, let's hop right into this first category, which is going to be Best Animated Short Film. Now, this category is special to me this year because not only did I watch all 15 of the shortlisted films, I also watched, I think, about 50 to 60 of the long-listed films. This year, I became pretty good friends with someone who is a voter in the animation branch of the Academy. And so I helped him watch through the short films because it can often be a bit of a chore. There was a lot of god-awful films that were eligible for the Oscar that were not shortlisted. Sometimes it was genuinely painful to get through this, but of these 15 films, a lot of the movies that I was scared would get in, those films got left out, and I'm really grateful for that. So this is a pretty good lineup of what we possibly could have gotten. And just to shout out 2 films that aren't in the short list that I really loved and were Oscar eligible. The first one is Werewolf, which was a Slovakian animated film about a teenager who draws pictures of dogs on DeviantArt, who's forced to draw really explicit images for an older person that poses as their friend online. It's one of the best depictions of growing up on the internet that I have ever seen. The other film that I'm really sad isn't here is Crab Day. This was a student film coming out of Britain's National Film and Television School, and last year this short film won the BAFTA. Crab Day was fantastic, and if it was here, I think it could have won the category, and I'm really disappointed that it didn't make it. But let's look at the 15 films that are here. As of right now, my prediction for what is going to win the Best Animated Short Film category is A Bear Named Wojtek. A Bear Named Wojtek is a Polish animated film, and it tells a story that I was actually familiar with beforehand, which was the story of a bear that as a cub was adopted by a military regiment, and as it grew older, it actually became an honorary soldier in the Polish army. It's a really remarkable and quite odd true story. It's one of the longest films in the animated short category. It feels like it was designed to be a TV special in the way that a lot of Oscar-winning short films have been in years past. Not as much recently, but if you go back to the 90s or before, a lot of the time you will find these longer films that were clearly meant to be TV specials. Think of like Wallace and Gromit, for example. A Bear Named Wojtek is heartwarming. It has a story that's funny, unique, and accessible, and an art style that's reminiscent of picture books. Of this whole lineup, it's probably the most accessible, the most easy to like. On the other hand, I could see this getting snubbed in favor of some of the more daring, adventurous films here. Like I said, it does feel like a TV special. That's not the type of movie that often gets in. But if it does get in, I would assume that this would be our winner. The next film I'd like to talk about was my Academy voter friend. This was his favorite, and that is In the Shadow of the Cypress. This is an Iranian animated film, and its style is really unique. Very strong colors, strong lines. It's sort of meshing together that cartoon saloon aesthetic with some more Eastern influences. And it tells a story that has this air of importance that the Academy seems to really like. It's a film about PTSD and about overcoming trauma. When a whale washes up on the beach beside their house, a father and daughter try to figure out how to get the whale back into the ocean. Even though I feel like this is less likely to win than A Bear Named Wojtek, I do think this is more likely to be nominated. Honestly, I can't really see a world where this isn't nominated. It is such a striking looking film, so visually distinct, so eye-catching, and it has a really powerful story. And the third most likely film here is maybe Elephants. This is the latest animated film from Norwegian-Canadian animator Toril Kova. She has previously been nominated for 3 Oscars, winning 1 for The Danish Poet, which is one of my favorite short films of all time. And she has a really compelling style, not just visually, but also narratively. All of Kova's films are memoirs. They're small chapters, stories about her childhood, about growing up in Norway. Her most recent nomination was for the film Me and My Molten, which was about growing up and wanting a specific type of bike and begging her parents for that bike. In Maybe Elephants, this film follows her family as they moved to Kenya for a year. So it's a reflection on the past, on memory, and on colonial memory as well. It's a pretty profound film, and it's very sweet, even just on a surface level. And because Kova is an Academy favorite, I feel like this one is incredibly likely for an Oscar nomination. At number 4, I have Wander to Wonder. And I have mentioned there's really no precursors for the short film categories. The one that we can look at is the BAFTA short film. The one film that crosses over both is Wander to Wonder. People really love this movie. It clearly has audience behind it, but at the same time, it is a bit strange and unsettling, and that could sort of push it away from a nomination. But that said, the voter that I watched it with reacted extremely positively to this one, when a lot of the other weird films he reacted very negatively to. For example, the Don Hertzfeldt, which we'll get to later, he had a viscerally negative reaction to it and said that he would have turned it off after 6 minutes if I was not there with him. But we'll get to the Hertzfeldt later. Wander to Wonder is a live-action stop-motion animation hybrid, and it's about these 3 small, like, borrowers-esque creatures that live in the creator of a TV show's house. Our 3 small animated protagonists have mountains of fan letters, and they spend their days reenacting their glory times, filming these sketches that have a very Teletubbies-esque feel to them, but it's clear that they haven't been famous in 20 to 30 years. The equipment is out of date, they're all aging, and the creator of the TV show is dead on the floor. Like I said, it's a weird film, it's surreal, but it's very funny and has a good heart to it. And it talks a lot about that feeling of growing old, being forgotten by the industry in a way that I think a lot of voters will empathize with. A lot of elements that reminded me of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, which again, doesn't quite feel like an Oscar-nominated type of film. But with the audience love, with the attention from BAFTA, it's one that at the moment I can't resist having in my top 5. Currently, my 5th spot and the last film that I have getting nominated is Magic Candies. This is a Japanese animated short film directed by Daisuke Nishio, who is well known for directing multiple Dragon Ball Z movies, as well as 199 episodes of the anime. So this is a veteran animator branching out into a different style of animation. This is not an anime film. Magic Candies is a sweet story of a kid who finds a bag of candies and discovers that each candy allows him to speak with different inanimate objects around his apartment. It's really a film about learning to coexist with the environment around you, learning how your actions impact each of the things, the people, and the animals in your life. It's not a very substantial film, but it is an eye-popping one. So that is my top 5 in the category. Now let's talk what comes next. Right outside the top 5, I have The Wild-Tempered Clavier. This is an experimental short film. It feels very much like an old NFB short film by a filmmaker like Norman McLaren. A movie that has absolutely no story. It's just about doing something unique within the animated medium that's never been done before. In this movie, they treat rolls of toilet paper as though they are strips of 16mm film. A very old animation style was filmmakers who would draw on strips of 16mm. And with The Wild-Tempered Clavier, it's a playful mix of mediums. The idea of drawing on each little square of toilet paper and then using that as stop motion. And sometimes we do get films like this in the category that more than anything else, focus on the form. This type of film does get nominated very often, and I'm quite tempted to shift this in over either Wander to Wonder or Magic Candies. Number 7 is Beautiful Men. Beautiful Men is about 3 Belgian brothers who travel to Turkey for a hair transplant. And we follow them in the few days leading up to this as old fights, old resentments spark between the 3 of them. It's really a film about how although we continue to age in our bodies, although our hairlines may recede, we're still the same kids that fought with each other in the schoolyard all these years ago. These brotherly resentments and this brotherly love is just as strong, and you can imagine the kids underneath all of this. Frankly, looking at my list right now, I don't know why I do have this outside of the top 5. Talking about it again, there is so much that does ring true and feels like something that voters would very much go for. Beautiful Men could really strike the right type of voter. Older men in the Academy who are dealing with their masculinity in various ways. Thinking about it now, I do think Beautiful Men might have to fit into my top 5. At number 8, I have Bottle George. This is a Japanese stop-motion animated film, and it is some of the most remarkable stop-motion sets that I have ever seen. When I first watched it, I could not believe that they did this in stop motion. I thought it had to be some elements of CG. Now that said, this film does get a bit corny at times in its approach to how it speaks about alcoholism. The film follows a little anthropomorphized hare inside of a bottle of whiskey who befriends a young boy whose father is an alcoholic. He's sort of a personification of the father's alcoholism and the fact that he is trapped by this bottle. It feels a bit on the nose, a little bit too heavy-handed in terms of how it almost Pixarifies its depiction of alcoholism. So it's a film I'm torn on. Formally gorgeous, absolutely beautiful stop motion, but in the way that it's speaking about it, I'm not sure if it's going to connect with the Academy or if it's going to feel a bit too trite and contrived. Number 9 is Don Hertzfeldt's film Me. This is widely predicted to be the winner of the category, with 83% of people on Awards Expert saying that this will be the winner. And do I agree with that? No, I think that's insane. Of course you're going to predict a Don Hertzfeldt film when you've never heard of any of the other animators in the category. I love Don Hertzfeldt. It's Such a Beautiful Day ranks among my 50 favorite films of all time. Me is a very interesting entry into his filmography, developed originally to be a visual accompaniment to an album by an unnamed band. After the band had a scandal, Don Hertzfeldt retooled the movie and changed it to be his own thing. While the band has not been named, it's like 99% that it's Arcade Fire for their album We, released I think a few months before Win Butler, one of the frontmen of Arcade Fire, was accused of sexual assault and misconduct. All the pieces fit that this was meant to be a visual accompaniment to an Arcade Fire album. And watching it, I have no fucking idea how this would have fit with that Arcade Fire album. It's the type of film that I feel like needs a rewatch because it is so cryptic. It seems to be about an inventor who creates something that allows people to look back into the past, almost like a Zoom call through time. He becomes so obsessed with this invention and with building this thing that he loses touch with the world and with his family. And there's a lot going on in this movie. There's a baby that is born as just an eye that then grows to be the size of the galaxy. There's a lot of fucking weird shit in this movie. And while I dug it a lot, speaking from the voter that I was sitting with who reacted extremely negatively, I don't want to use anecdotal evidence as like, no one's in the Academy is going to like this movie because this one person who probably doesn't represent the whole Academy didn't like it. But just seeing his response and feeling my own response, it is so strange and cryptic that I feel like it will alienate people the way that it alienated my friend. So while I understand the logic that people have behind putting it as their number 1, I don't know if I can get behind it. It is just such a strange, surreal, absurd piece of work that I have no idea how this would fit into this category. When I'm looking at Wander to Wonder and thinking, ooh, is that too weird? Me is a whole other level of strangeness and absurdity. This is not World of Tomorrow, which did get Don Hertzfeldt an Academy Award nomination. This is something else entirely. At number 10, the French film Goodbye My World. This was animated as a student film, and it has some of those elements to it where it feels oftentimes like a tech demo as much as it does feel like a short film. The world is ending, asteroids are about to crash into the Earth, and a man wearing a fish mascot costume is trying to get across the city to say goodbye to the love of his life before the world ends. It's simple, it's effective, it's funny, but at the same time, that simplicity of plot, that lack of polish in the narrative feels like something that could keep this away from being nominated. The same way that there was an animated short last year, also a student project, that was about birds fighting over getting their eggs away from a volcano. It was a cute, easy film, but it might have been a little bit too simple, a little bit too straightforward for a nomination. So that's how I'm feeling about this one, but I would not be overly surprised to see it get in. Now, moving into these last 5 films, I think I would be quite surprised to see any of these break into the eventual nominations. Number 11 is Yuck. This is a French film about a world where when you're about to kiss someone, your lips start to glow pink. It's about a group of kids who over the summertime joke about how gross it is that people kiss each other, but secretly one of the boys has decided that he really wants to try kissing and his lips have started to glow sometimes too. It's a sweet, simple film that I don't think goes far enough into the idea. It just stays kind of at the surface level. It doesn't really touch on those ideas of shame that we have growing up, seeing this adult world that we want to be a part of, but still being a kid who has to play along with the idea that cooties are gross and everything. So while this one is cute, I do think it stays far too at the surface, doesn't touch on the themes on a deeper level in a way that I think could get it the nomination. Number 12 is A Crab in the Pool. It's currently ranked on the top 5 on Awards Expert, and I don't understand why. It's a film that did absolutely nothing for me on a personal level, and so while it may be biased, I just don't see this one as being a nomination. It's about two siblings sort of teasing each other by the poolside, and then we learn that the girl who is about to go through puberty is terrified of the idea of her breasts growing because her mother has just been fighting breast cancer. While that element of the film later on really hit with me, I felt quite cold to this one overall. It was an unpleasant art style, a story that really went nowhere for the most part, and although it had a solid final emotional punch to it, the rest of the film wasn't working, so I can't justify putting it into the category based on that. At number 13, The 21, a film that I found deeply gross and a little offensive. This is an inspirational animated film about an ISIS execution. You heard me right. It is an animated dramatization of an ISIS group executing 21 Arabic Christians. The film just gets so weirdly Jesus-y. These 21 men would not let even guns in their face crush their faith. Although it's quite beautifully drawn, the way the visuals represent the characters feels like it's drawing too clear of a line. All of the members of ISIS are shrouded and their skin is gray, their eyes are red. They look like the visual depiction of evil. In a way, these characters look like villains on a TV show like Samurai Jack. It's a very easy way out to look at acts of terrorism and dehumanize the perpetrators. To say that this evil could only be done by someone who is completely inhuman. But to say that is to not engage with the truth that is much scarier, which is that human beings are the ones that commit acts of violence like this. There's no way around that. On a visual level, the film takes a very easy, cliched way out of really engaging with this topic. And its overly preachy, sentimental way of using this story to make a point about how strong belief in Jesus is felt really out of touch. Number 14, Percebes, an experimental animated film about a barnacle that is harvested as sort of a rare seafood that is used in a lot of Portuguese dishes. It's a gorgeous looking film, but I didn't feel that there was much that it had to say. I don't see what would grip onto a voter to make them put this down. There are lots of visually stunning films in this category, and I don't see much else that this film has going for it at this time. And the least likely film for a nomination, in my opinion, is Origami. Origami is essentially just a tech demo, a character made of paper doing all sorts of movements, doing sort of a dance as other paper and origami moves around it. It is a beautiful film to look at, but it feels like a work in progress. Due to the fact that it all takes place in this void, it feels like this was something that was meant to be added to something else, not a finished animated film. Something that shows prowess in character animation, but isn't interested in doing anything more. So looking at my top 15, I'm quite tempted to move The Wild-Tempered Clavier and Beautiful Men into my top 5 over Wander to Wonder and Magic Candies. And you know what? I think I will make that switch. Both of them, I feel like, have stronger arguments and have less riding against them than I feel with both Wander to Wonder and Magic Candies. So my new top 5 here is A Bear Named Wojtek, In the Shadow of the Cypress, Maybe Elephants, Beautiful Men, and The Wild-Tempered Clavier. But again, that top 7 I think is really, really tight. I feel like 4 out of 5 are going to be in that top 7, and then the last one might be from 8, 9, or 10. Or, you could get crazy and say, maybe I'm wrong and I'm just biased against A Crab in the Pool, and it could be that one too. So moving on to the next category, we're going to talk about Best Live Action Short Film. Of this category, I have seen 14 out of 15. I was not able to find a copy of The Ice Cream Man, so my points on that one will be entirely based on what I've been told by other people who did manage to see the movie. My lineup here lines up 3 out of 5 with the top 5 on Awards Expert. The film that I think will win this category is currently the film that 80% of people on Awards Expert believe will win. Now, while I do think that is alphabet bias on the app, I do think that they're onto something with this one, and that is Anuja. Anuja is a film about child labor in India. It tells the story of an incredibly gifted young girl who is torn between a choice. She can go to school and have a chance at a better life, or she can continue to work at a factory for her and her sister to get by. In the past, it has always been the ticket to an Academy Award nomination to take a kid and either just put them through immense pain or kill them. There was one year, I think it was 2018, where 3 out of 5 of the live action short films were about children dying. So Anuja is our film this year that sort of falls under that umbrella. However, this film, I was really surprised by how empathetic and kind this movie is. There is no violence inflicted upon this kid. There is no harm that comes to this brilliant girl. Instead, Anuja opts to be a movie about hope for the future. So even in the film's darkest moments, there's this element of joy that comes through. 2 sisters spending time together, laughing, telling stories. Although it tackles this very serious topic, it has this very light nature to it, and it never betrays the topic at hand or writes off how serious this issue of child labor in India is. But it just approaches it knowing that there are so many films about this topic that deal with the pain, and so few that look at the hope of how does one escape from this environment. And for that, I really deeply appreciate this film. It's got all the right stuff for a nomination for a win. It's got heart, a serious topic, and it is beautifully made. The cinematography on this one is stunning. And so that's why this one is the one that I am predicting as the likeliest film to win the Oscar this year. At number 2, and a film that I could definitely see upsetting, is I'm Not a Robot. I'm Not a Robot is a Dutch film that evolves from a sort of an absurd idea, but takes it extremely seriously. A woman who in her office one day simply can't get past a CAPTCHA test. And after failing the test, she begins to wonder, am I a robot? Funny comedy skit idea, basically, that they take completely 100% seriously. They run with it. It opens with that cover of Creep from the Social Network trailer, the choir of young boys singing Radiohead's Creep. From the start, it is clear that they are not playing this idea for laughs whatsoever, which I think it makes it all the better and all the funnier to think of. But that's what I think is so endearing about the movie. What easily could have been a 5-minute comedy sketch on YouTube turns into an existential crisis. A woman genuinely engaging with her place in the world, looking at who she is and questioning all of the memories that she has. Why I think this one is very likely to get nominated is that it is just such an absurd idea that when I think of all of these movies, the one that comes to mind first, if someone were to ask me, describe one of these short films, I would go, oh, there's one about a woman who can't pass a CAPTCHA test, so she thinks that she's a robot. It comes to mind quickly. It is a high concept, easy film to describe. And so I think this will be top of mind for many voters going into the nominations. At number 3, The Man Who Could Not Remain Silent, the winner of this year's Cannes Palme d'Or for short films. The protagonist of this film is just an unassuming guy on a train. And when the train is stopped somewhere in Serbia and a paramilitary squad gets on the train searching for Muslims, someone sitting a few seats away from our protagonist does stand up, does call into question what this paramilitary group is doing. This is a film that is based on true events during the Bosnian genocide. The titular character, the one who could not remain silent, is Tomo Buzov, a real person who has gone down in fame. The only person on this train who tried to stop what was about to happen. We never see those events come to pass on screen. We just know that after this film is done, all of the people who were taken off of the train were killed. It's a powerful and stirring film about what it means to take action, and also a film about what it means to stay silent, to see injustice and not speak up. This is a film that will resonate very deeply with a lot of people this year, witnessing the events that are happening in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as Lebanon. What does it mean to speak up, and what does it mean to stay silent? It feels to me like a very strong contender, maybe not for a win, but for a nomination. At number 4 is Alien. This is an American film about deportation that happens specifically at people's USCIS appointments to apply for their green cards. And this is quite a common practice that undocumented immigrants will go to their appointments to apply for legal citizenship. And at those appointments, they will be given to the feds. This film is heart-wrenching, it is difficult to watch, and it feels extremely relevant, especially going into the next few months. We're likely to see movements towards mass deportations. And even we've been seeing a lot of talk that they want to revoke green cards, they want to revoke naturalization. So this is a film that I think is sure to hit very strongly with voters and feels extremely likely to be a nomination. And the last film that I have in my top 5 here is An Orange from Jaffa. This is a Palestinian film about a taxi ride that turns into a full-day event. The film follows a Polish-Palestinian man who gets into a taxi and tries to cross past an Israeli checkpoint. But because something's wrong with the documentation, the taxi driver and the passenger are stuck at the checkpoint for the entire day. A sort of humiliating display where no one is checking up on them, no one's doing their paperwork, they're just made to sit in their car waiting there for hours as IDF soldiers goof around outside. The harassment that Palestinian people often go through just trying to travel through their own country. This year, it's very likely we're going to see multiple films across many categories nominated that deal with Palestine, and An Orange from Jaffa, aside from No Other Land, approaches the topic most directly. It reminds me of another nominated short film from a few years ago, being The Present, which was also about someone trying to get through Israeli checkpoints. It's a topic that we've seen resonate with voters in the past, and I think this year will resonate more than ever for obvious reasons. So that is my top 5, and I feel quite strong. While I know my track record is 3 out of 5 correct, I don't see what 2 of those are going to miss. I don't see what could miss. Those all, at least in my opinion, have really strong arguments for why they should be here. So at this point, I feel really good about those 5, but let me break down the next 10 afterwards. At number 6, this is the one film that I have not seen, which is why it's airing a little bit higher, because I don't know what to expect from this one, and what I've been told from people who have seen the film is that it is incredibly Oscar baity. It's the type of film that feels like it's cloying for awards attention, and that is The Ice Cream Man. This is a World War II Holocaust set film, which is about an ice cream man who comes face to face with a notorious Nazi war criminal. This one was described to me as is if Uwe Boll directed an Oscar bait short film. And despite that description, the person who told me about this film does have this in their top 5. They think it is Academy catnip, the type of thing that they bite on all the time. They say that although this might not be a film that they liked whatsoever, they just see that this is the type of movie that the Academy time after time goes for. And I can't deny that. I think that a good rule in this category is that if there is a Holocaust film here, they will go for it very often. Now, of course, that has bit me in the ass a few times in recent years. I've put Holocaust films in very high spots that have been snubbed just because people didn't like the film enough. And from what I'm gathering, I don't expect The Ice Cream Man to necessarily be liked enough for its topic to get it into the top 5. But I could be wrong about that. Again, this is the one film I haven't seen. I don't have my own take on this one, but the topic at hand does seem like something that could get a nomination. At number 7, The Last Ranger. This is a South African film that deals with poaching and tells the story of a park ranger whose job is to look after the endangered rhinos in the area. She ends up going head to head with some poachers that mean to cut off the horn of one of the last rhinos in the area. It's a well-shot film with a topic that I feel like could connect with the Academy, but it feels a little overly sentimental. It feels a little bit cloying in a way. That type of movie does often get nominations, but when there are so many films above this that also speak on topics and do so in much more of a nuanced way, I kind of feel like I have to gravitate towards those. Although I could totally be wrong, I could definitely see The Last Ranger ending up as one of our 5 nominees. At number 8, I have Clodagh, which is an Irish short film. Like Wander to Wonder, this is longlisted at the BAFTAs. Interestingly, the cinematography for this one was done by Jomo Frey of Nickel Boys fame. This film is about the assistant to a priest who, in her spare time, runs an Irish dancing group at the local church. She has very strong religious values to uphold. So when a new girl comes in and is absolutely spectacular at dancing, she finds herself morally torn between what to do. When this extremely talented young girl reveals that she's from the next town over and therefore is not technically allowed under the rules to dance with this church. The film is really about what is the cost of a small lie. A lie that most people would never think twice about, but for this deeply religious Irish woman seems like an affront to God itself. It's a beautifully shot film, gorgeous dancing, but it is very small. It's not a story that's going to rock anyone's world. It's just a very interesting, simple character study that is extremely effective in what it does. So in my opinion, I don't believe this is the type of film that gets a nomination, although I certainly believe that this will be nominated for and possibly win the BAFTA. Number 9 is Room Taken. This one is about an unhoused refugee looking for somewhere to stay, who ends up sneaking into the home of a blind old woman and secretly living there and fixing all of her things. While the film plays all of this as it's meant to be charming, it's meant to be sentimental and uplifting, a lot of it is like deeply unsettling as we watch this man who has broken into this woman's home and lives there without her knowing it. This very easily could have been a horror movie if the main character were not a really nice guy. A lot of it is nail-biting tense. We're just waiting for this guy to be caught. And so it is very effective in that way, but at the same time, it's also like a little disturbing, a little upsetting. It was a bit hard for me to rationalize how like cutesy it was trying to be when it was a film about someone breaking and entering and illegally living in someone's house. It's a scary story, but they play it as though it's like a really sweet story about friendship and connection. So I'm really torn on this one personally, and at least from reading the Letterboxd reviews of this one, a lot of people feel the same way that I do. So I'm not sure where voters will land on that. I could see this be the type of film that kind of swindles voters into being like, yeah, this is sweet and emotionally impactful. At number 10, I have The Masterpiece. This one is currently in the top 5 on Awards Expert. It's a Spanish film about a wealthy family that hires 2 immigrant scrap collectors to come to their house and sort through the junk in their garage. The wealthy wife realizes that they have a painting in their car. A painting that doesn't look like scrap at all, but looks like something that might be worth millions of dollars. So the script flips now, and rather than the scrap collectors looking to take stuff from the wealthy people's home, the wealthy people are looking to get this painting from the scrap collectors. It all plays out as a commentary on class, about how the ones who have more have less to lose. Now with that said, it is an 18-minute long film that only really deals with those themes for the last 4 or 5 minutes. And that scene is pretty spectacular, but much of the film is just lead up. So while I really like this one, it takes a while to get to the point. And knowing how they vote for the short films at the Academy, they only force you to watch the first 6 minutes of the film. And if a film hasn't grabbed you in the first 6 minutes, you can skip past it. So I do worry that that approach and mentality to viewing the short films may make this one struggle a little bit in getting the nomination. Number 11 is Crust. This is a German film about a family with an odd tradition. For each of the children to become adults, they need to get their first scar. A 12-year-old boy who is being forced to undertake this trial to become a man is scared of being hurt. The film is all about expectations from family. How do we live up to traditions? How do we walk the path that our family has laid out for us? The production design of this one is especially remarkable. The fact that on a student film budget, they managed to build an entire roller coaster in the woods. But ultimately, it's a bit too strange, a bit too cold for me to feel confident in this getting a nomination. It sort of rides that weirdness of like a Yorgos Lanthimos film. All these very deadpan, scarred up characters try to force a child to injure himself. I know I mentioned that hurting and killing kids is the best way to get an Oscar in this category, but normally it's with like a theme or a topic, or it's talking about a real event, or it's drawing on emotional strings. Crust could not be less interested in creating an emotional response upon seeing these kids get hurt. It's a film that's designed to make you not feel, to disconnect you from what's going on. And so for that reason, I have it firmly outside of my top 10. Number 12 is Dovecote. This does star Zoe Saldana, potentially a good argument for it getting a nomination. But on the other hand, it's too much of an experimental film for me to believe that this can get in. There's not a single word spoken here. It is a silent meditation that takes place in a woman's prison in Venice. The camera sort of floats silently around this prison as we watch a woman on her final day of being incarcerated as she prepares to leave. It's very ethereal, very artsy, and while I will admit it's not really my thing, I also don't feel like it's offering enough for voters to really grab onto. And so while it does have that star power that might make it tempting to put in for a nomination, I will remind you that more often than not, when a big star is in one of these movies, it does not get nominated. They gatekeep those movies out. But it is beautifully shot, has great music, and maybe the Academy likes the craft elements of it enough to give it a nomination. I just think there's so many stronger films above this. At number 13, another film in the awards expert top 5, Harris 70. It's about a man who's caring for his mother who has dementia, and he learns that a way to calm her down is to feed her little white lies. Tell her that her husband is still alive, he's just on a business trip, whether it's Paris or New York or Madrid. Whatever city he tells his mother about, she reminisces over her past trips, and he gets out scrapbooks for her to look at so that she can relive these moments. Ultimately, we have seen all of this before, and we've seen it in much more emotionally impactful ways. At times, Paris 70 feels a little bit like a Hallmark treatment of this disease. Now, could that connect with voters? It certainly could. I just can't count this as one of the most memorable in the category or as one of the strongest films on a purely technical level. And speaking of films that are extremely strong on a technical level, at number 14, I have Edge of Space, a film that feels like it could be a visual effects tech demo. It basically feels like a Reader's Digest version of The Right Stuff by Philip Kaufman, like a 15-minute summary of all of those movies about a hotshot Air Force pilot who ends up being a NASA astronaut in the early days of the space race. There's nothing new that this film is offering. There's no new frontiers that this is breaking. It's the most cliched, stereotypical version of this story playing out. And sure, it has some pretty visuals, but ultimately there is nothing more to it than some pretty visuals. We've seen this done before in a 2-hour film that is far more effective than what this 15-minute really ever could be. And in last place, I have The Compatriot, which is, like The Ice Cream Man, a Holocaust-themed short film. Two Nazis traveling through the Czech Republic are stranded late at night, and they stop at this man's house and have a conversation with him, gradually learning that his wife died in one of the camps. A lot of things about this film make me feel like this is not happening in this category. It is far and away the most amateur looking and feeling film. The color grade is all wrong. The lighting feels washed out. The sound oftentimes feels unpolished. Elements of this feel like a student film. And while many films in this category are student films, for example, Crust, it never feels like a student film. The Compatriot through and through feels like something that I would have seen a peer make in film school, and it wouldn't have been one of the best films of the class. So while this does deal with themes that I think the Academy will often gravitate towards, there are other films, like The Ice Cream Man, from what I've heard, is well shot. It's relatively well directed. The Compatriot is tackling those same issues, but it feels much less polished. At this point, I feel comfortable saying that that is my least likely film to be nominated here. And like I said before, I feel quite confident with this top 5, but I could see a world where you swap out one of my top 5 for The Last Ranger, for The Ice Cream Man. But in my opinion, this top 5 I feel really good about. I feel like this is another 3-4 out of 5 here. And moving on to our last category, documentary short. Currently my winner is a Netflix documentary, but not the Netflix documentary that awards expert expects to be the top contender here. 82% of awards expert expects The Only Girl in the Orchestra to be the winner, but I'm going with the other Netflix documentary, Michaela's Voice, A Letter to the World. This is sure to be a deeply controversial film if it is nominated and if it does go on to win. Michaela's Voice, A Letter to the World is about a 12-year-old nonverbal autistic girl. It specifically focuses on a form of communication that has been repeatedly disproven as a technique to communicate with nonverbal people. Having an interpreter or helper hold up a sheet of paper that the nonverbal person can tap to spell out various words. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this area, but from reading the Letterboxd reviews, a lot of people are very angry that this film depicts this and speaks about it in a way as though it could help people when it has been repeatedly disproven as a method of communication. Now, with that said, from the way that the film shows it, it seems like it works for this girl. And though she is nonverbal, the film is narrated using her thoughts and poems that she has written. And even knowing that all parts of this are disproven, it is successful at being quite emotionally moving. It's the type of film that will spark outrage with people who know what is being depicted here. But for those who don't know, I think it's very easy to be swept up in the sentimentality of it. I expect a group of voters who might be less informed on the topic to really be head over heels for a film as emotional and powerful as this one. But I will predict that when this gets nominated, it will be slammed with like the most controversy of any of the short films, in the way that we often see one of the short films gets really just raked over the coals. I don't think that's going to affect its chances. As we've seen multiple times in the past, the Academy is not aware of or cares about internet outrage. At number 2, another very sentimental and heart-wrenching film being Death by Numbers, which focuses on the trial of the Parkland school shooter. It's narrated by Samantha Fuentes, one of the survivors of the school shooting, as she prepares to go to court and face down her attempted murderer. This film really focuses on giving voice to the victims of this shooting, and I do appreciate that about it. It's a topic that I feel like Academy members are going to be very interested in showing some support towards. It's a striking, emotional film, very hard to watch. They often like to go with films that are a bit difficult, that kind of force you to deal with some difficult subject matter. Likewise, number 3 is Incident, which is my favorite in the category. This deals with an incident of police brutality, and it does it in a very interesting way, presenting it with absolutely no commentary and barely any editing whatsoever. The film overlays surveillance footage and audio from police body cams to tell the entire story of the 5 minutes before and the 20 or so minutes after a barber was shot down on the streets of Chicago in the summer of 2018. It uses a lot of split screens. So we're seeing all of these events playing out at the exact same time. It's a fascinating way of approaching this subject matter that is so often fed to us by police services with heavily edited footage that creates a narrative. Here we see all of the events unfolding exactly as they happened, all at the same time. There's no narrative hand here shaping it. It is just reality, which is so often not what documentary is. It's a big misconception that documentary is reality filmed, but it really is an author's hand guiding you through real footage. It's very easy through editing to craft a narrative that sways viewers to believe what you want them to believe. But here in Incident, it's the most pure form that I can recall seeing in documentary in a very long time. Incident has two things in its corner, which is it is simultaneously very important and impactful subject matter, and this is going to really please the more hardcore documentary lovers in the documentary branch who really like voting for the artsy films. This is form bending, boundary shifting in a way that the documentary branch really tends to love. That said, the General Academy would never give this one an award. It'll be nominated, but I think it has no chance at winning. It's a little bit too out there in terms of form, but it feels very likely for a nomination. And at number 4, I Am Ready, Warden. This is a film about the death penalty, which takes place in the few weeks before a prisoner is sent to the electric chair. In his years in prison, he has focused on becoming a Christian. He wants to go from prison to prison. If his sentence is commuted, he'd like to go from prison to prison preaching and talking about his experience with Christianity. And meanwhile, the film also interviews the family of the victim, asking how they feel about this reformed version of the killer that changed their lives. On a personal level, I feel like the film doesn't make strong enough statements in terms of condemning the death penalty. It's a little on the fence where it wants to say the death penalty is bad, but also the family deserves justice. There is a lot of nuance in this topic. Just keeping it at that surface level and saying the death penalty is bad, but also they deserve justice isn't a strong enough statement. I think this has a topic that's strong enough to get it into the top 5. It also is being distributed by MTV Documentary Films. That will give it a little bit of a boost because MTV has been very good at campaigning documentaries in both short and feature. And the last one in the category is Chasing Rue. It's from 2-time nominee Sky Fitzgerald. He was previously nominated for Lifeboat as well as Hunger Ward. Sky Fitzgerald has this very slick approach to filmmaking, a very polished studio look to his documentaries. Chasing Rue is a much less devastating topic. So ultimately, that very slick look to the film can often feel much more fitting to it. Chasing Rue is about the culling of kangaroos and other wildlife in Australia. It's a very interesting film about hunting practices and how, although it is necessary to cull the population of a species that does not have many natural predators, some of the practices that go into hunting the kangaroos are unsustainable and could later on lead to them being endangered. So it exists in that nuance quite well, dealing with the fact that, yes, hunting does need to happen. However, the current practices are damaging. The fact that the branch has given this filmmaker 2 past nominations could give him an argument to be nominated again for this one. They clearly like his style, and this is very much in the same vein as the style that he showed in his previous 2 films. With that said, his previous 2 films were about those devastating human topics. Chasing Rue is different. This is a wildlife film. And so that's why I have it near the bottom of my category here. I think it's in. It has all the right stuff, but it might just not be the right topic for the Academy this year. Now moving out of my top 5, number 6 is Keeper. It was the gold medal winner at the Student Academy Awards for documentary this year, and it tells the story of a beekeeper in the Bronx. And while this starts off as a story about a man who makes a living keeping bees, it becomes an investigation of what does the word keeper mean? How do we take care of one another? First off, it looks at this man and his daughters, how he raised them to be strong young women as a single father. And then it flips the script and becomes a film about how children take on the role of their parents' keeper as they grow sick, grow old, as the beekeeper is diagnosed with cancer. So it's a sweet film that, although it doesn't go into these big topics. It's not a film about school shootings. It's not a film about police brutality. It's not a film about the death sentence. It is a simple and effective film about the human condition. And in that way, I could certainly see this getting that nomination. But ultimately, I do have to lean to those films that deal with the big topics more than this one. Speaking of films that deal with big topics, at number 7, I have Once Upon a Time in Ukraine. This is directed by Betsy West, previously who directed the Oscar-nominated, almost Oscar-winning film RBG. And in Once Upon a Time in Ukraine, she tells the story of multiple children living in Ukraine. Each of these kids is dealing with devastation from the war in some way, whether it's parents that they've lost, parents who are still fighting in the war, homes that they've been relocated from. Each of these stories is unique and different and shows the variety of ways that children and innocents can be affected by war. It's all framed like a fairy tale. Of course, the title being Once Upon a Time in Ukraine. That isn't meant to be Once Upon a Time in the way of like a Tarantino film. It's meant to be Once Upon a Time like a fairy tale. And throughout the movie, there are maps drawn of Ukraine that feel like they're drawn by children, marked up like a magic kingdom. The children narrate it as though they're telling fairy tale stories. This approach is why I'm a little bit less confident in this making the category. It could come across as a little bit out of touch to make a film about such a devastating conflict into a story about fairy tales told by children. But ultimately, this is a film about a very big issue, and that big issue has proven in past years to get quite a few nominations for its filmmakers. And it's possible that we get a nomination for Porcelain War this year too. Number 8 is Until He's Back. This is a film about Moroccan refugees crossing the Gibraltar Strait into Spain, and it tells the story of a father who is trying to recover the body of his child who was lost at sea. So this film looks at the refugee crisis through a very specific lens, which is what are the efforts that go on to recover bodies that are floating in the Mediterranean Sea? It's another one of these films that focuses on a big topic, but what's going against this one is that it's a very long short film. It's about 40 minutes long, and a lot of that time is not dealt with the central subject. It goes on a lot of tangents. There's a lot of time spent not devoted to the emotional core of the story. A lot of other films have done this sort of look at what it takes to cross the Mediterranean. I just mentioned one that was nominated a few years ago, being Lifeboat. And this film is straddling wanting to be a film about that journey, as well as wanting to be a film about the families that are left behind and the search for their lost loved ones. So while I think that this is a strong topic that has gotten nominations in the past, it doesn't quite feel like a strong enough handling of the topic for me to believe that this could be strong enough to get into that top 5. Number 9 is the current frontrunner on Awards Expert, The Only Girl in the Orchestra, a Netflix documentary which is about the first woman to play in the New York Philharmonic. This one mostly plays as your typical documentary about girl power. The adversity that this woman faced trying to get into the orchestra, the adversity that she faced while in the orchestra, the way that she was written off by the other men in the symphony, and the way that she was supported by Leonard Bernstein, as well as the way that the press wrote about her and her accomplishments, and the way that it kind of degraded her. It feels very puff piecey. It's got that very signature, like, girl boss vibe to it that isn't really saying anything new on the topic. It's certainly an inspiring story, but it's not really a documentary treatment that I think is doing enough to warrant its inclusion here. I feel like we've seen so many documentaries like this in the past, and so many that have been more effective. It is a very simple, surface-level take, and sometimes that is what the Academy likes. That's sometimes what they go for. It is an inspirational look at a trailblazing woman in a field that was really hard to get into for women. But again, nothing groundbreaking here. Number 10, I have A Swimming Lesson. This is another one that feels a little bit puff piecey, another one that feels like it's just designed to sort of like live on YouTube as like a interesting little documentary about a person that you might not have heard of before. This one is about a swimming instructor in Los Angeles who has a very unique method of teaching young children to swim, where he basically starts a week of swimming lessons by being a villain, basically dragging the kids into the water, saying, you have no power over this, you're going to be in the water. And as the week goes on, he supports the kids and sort of helps them to grow confident and comfortable. It's a small film about like an everyday kind of hero. Notably, the filmmakers are very famous because it's Rashida Jones and Will McCormick. Rashida Jones, of course, being famous because she's Quincy Jones' daughter. She was on Parks and Recreation and The Office, and she wrote Celeste and Jesse Forever alongside Will McCormick here, who is an Oscar winner for his short film, If Anything Happens, I Love You. But ultimately, this one feels a little insubstantial. It's a small, charming film about one of those everyday heroes that often goes without recognition. But that's also why I don't think this needs to be in the category. It's just too inconsequential around so many other films that are about very big topics. And unlike something like Nai Nai and Waipo last year, which was similarly about a small topic, this one doesn't have the same level of charm, which typically is needed to catapult films about small people into the spotlight. Number 11, I have Eternal Father. This is another one in the Awards Expert Top 5, and I'm not quite sure why, because it seems like people everywhere dislike this film quite a bit. It has low ratings on LETTERBOXD, low ratings on IMDb, and unlike a film like Michaela's Voice, which has a reason for people to really vitriolically hate the movie, Eternal Father, it seems like people just dislike because it is boring, which I disagree with. I think this would be in my top 5 personally. It's all about a man who has decided that he's going to cryogenically freeze himself rather than dying. And it's about his family coping with the decision that their father, they only have a few years left with him because he's going to hop into a cryo chamber and hope that they can revive his body in hundreds of years when science has advanced. Normally, I really like films that focus on morally ambiguous characters like this, people who do things that are a bit strange and off-putting. But ultimately, with Eternal Father, I don't feel like it questions him enough. I don't feel like it really reckons with the fact that he is essentially killing himself and he's convincing his wife and his children to do the same. Now, with that said, this is the best looking documentary of any of the ones that I've mentioned. The cinematography here is incredibly creative. They're essentially doing a talking heads profile documentary, but in a way that I've never seen before. Every shot composition is unique. There's one shot that stands out in my mind where they're interviewing him through like a frosted glass window. There's a lot of really interesting visual ideas that I don't often see in documentary and make this film very compelling to watch. But ultimately, with how it seems like people on the internet are reacting to this one, I can't see the Academy being all that different. Being the most visually stunning film in the category doesn't feel like the shortcut to getting a nomination the way it might in like live action short. Documentary, they're much more concerned on what is your film about? How are you educating people or making a change or inspiring people with the characters that you have chosen to profile? And with Eternal Father, I don't quite see any of that. Number 12, this is the one film in the category that I have not seen. That is The Quilters. From what I gather, this is a film about incarcerated men who take to quilting as a hobby in prison. Feels very in line with Sing Sing in a way, where incarcerated men find a way to deal with their emotions through artistry. What I've been told by basically everyone who's seen this film when I haven't is this one has that topic to it, but it's not very memorable. It sort of fades out of the mind pretty quickly. And when we do have another film in this category that focuses on incarceration and does so in much more of a gut punch way, being I Am Ready, Warden, I don't know if The Quilters really has the argument. Number 13 is Seat 31, Zoe Zephyr. This is a film about Montana's first trans congresswoman, and it really focuses on the ways in which both the public and the other people in Congress have marginalized Zoe, have censured her, how the freedom of speech crowd is against against her speaking up for the rights of trans people in Montana. While this is a very interesting story to profile, I think it sort of shoots itself in the foot a little bit because so much of the movie is not focused on what Zoe's fighting for, and it's not focused on the way that she was censured by the other Congress people. So much of it is focused on Zoe's personal life and on her desire to propose to her girlfriend. Ditching the political for the personal loses some of the power of the film, loses some of the impact of what this could have had. If it had really delved into the politics, showed what Zoe's fighting for, what Zoe's fighting against, I feel like this could have been a top 5, top 6, 7 contender. Number 14, Instruments of a Beating Heart. This is a Japanese film about the way that they teach first grade students music. And it focuses on one sort of slacker girl who doesn't spend time practicing at home, and it focuses on how the teachers deal with her and how she deals with her feeling of being inadequate in a class full of overachievers. It's a cute film, but again, it's one that feels so insubstantial in the wake of so many other films that deal with these big topics. And number 15 is Planet Walker, which tells the story of a man who, as a protest for climate change, decided to stop talking and then just started walking around America. This character is very intriguing, but the treatment of this film is so basic. And it's unfortunate because I do believe that this guy could have had a very interesting film, but this one takes his whole philosophy, his whole idea of why he decided to take a vow of silence in protest of climate destruction and simplifies it down to we should all be nicer to each other. This is a common pet peeve for me. This is my least favorite theme in movies, when films take really big issues and simplify them down to the world would be better if we were all nicer. Yeah, no shit. What does that advance our understanding of this topic? Why is the solution to climate change we should all be nicer to one another? It is such a basic understanding, and the treatment of the film is similarly basic. It is just interview after interview after interview with little drawings in between. There's nothing that this film does that stretches the medium or does anything interesting. We've seen this movie done 100 times before. It's not enhancing our understanding of the world or of these characters in any meaningful way. And that's why I feel quite confident putting this as my least likely film here. Now that you've heard my descriptions of all of these films and my prognostications, the decision is now up to you. What are you going to take from what I said here? What are you going to leave behind? One of the big things that gets in the way of getting perfect predictions on the short films that comes from watching all of them every year is I do get attached to ones. I do form opinions. I do form biases about these movies. The films that I like, the films that I don't like. Oftentimes you'll notice that the bottom of my list are the films that I just simply am not a fan of. So take what you will from this video, read about the films on Letterboxd before you make your final predictions. But I do urge you, if any of these films sound interesting to you, even the ones that don't end up getting a nomination, I urge you, go and check them out. There is so much inspiration that can be gained from engaging with short films and with the films of up-and-coming artists. So what are you predicting in each of these categories? I'm curious. Let me know down in the comments down below. And as always, thank you so much for joining me today. My name's Matt, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.